Hi, everyone. I'm happy to have Kevin Tumlinson on the show today. Kevin is an award winning and best selling fiction author, blogger, an award winning copywriter, as well as a host and co host of several podcasts, including the Wordslinger podcast, Creative Writing Career podcast, and Self Publishing Answers podcast. So, thanks for taking the time to chat with us today, Kevin. This is awesome.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, let's get started by, if you tell us a little more about your story and, what inspired you to start writing and then, going into copywriting and that sort of thing.
Okay. The running gag is that I wrote my first book at 5 years old, which is more or less true because what I did was write a story basically on one of these big chief notepads. With that big fat pencil, and that was an early indicator of my sort of love for storytelling. I always had been big on storytelling. One of my favorite gifts as a kid was for Christmas was a tape recorder, a cassette recorder, with a whole bag of cassettes. I have no idea why my mom and my stepfather decided this was a great gift for me, but they did, and I had a blast with it. Like I would dictate I wish I still had the tapes. I mean, I really do, but I would just dictate like detective stories. I was a big fan of Encyclopedia Brown. So I would do my own boy detective stories and complete with sound effects and that sort of thing. And Star Wars parodies and I would record sound effects to use while I was pretending to drive a car or something. I would do all these cool things with that. So it was a great gift. And it really nurtured in me a love for storytelling. The story that I wrote on Big Chief paper, I actually had given that to my stepfather, who was going to take it to work and type it up for me. And at some point, he asked me if I still wanted him to do that. He had it with him. And in my first ever swipe at modesty, I said, it's not that important. You can throw it away if you want, because in my head, I'm like, I don't want to get too big a head here. It's important, but I don't want anybody to think that I think too much of myself. And he threw it away. And so I was very sad. And that's it. That's unfortunate. And then I've never been modest since. But it did put me on a path of understanding storytelling, studying storytelling. Not in an academic sense at that point in my life, but I was paying attention to story, and I was enjoying creating my own stories. And that continued on through school. And anytime you're good at writing in public school, immediately the thing that they try to steer you toward is how to write for money. And that usually doesn't include writing books and does include short stories for some reason. They always push you toward something like journalism, And so I was very good in journalism. And I ended up writing for the local paper at 12 years old. So
Wow.
The other running gag is that I've been professionally published since 12 years old. And so, this is all early stuff. I mean, it was an early earmark for my life. And, it led sort of naturally to me. Once I was in college, I went for a communications degree. I started working in media. I worked in radio. I worked in television. Copywriting became something I did because first it was very simple, very natural for some reason, and I started working with ad agencies in the Houston area, which led to freelance work. Most of my career has been freelance, and because of all that, I have this. I developed a certain work ethic. I developed, the idea of working to deadline. I developed the idea of how to, even when you're not feeling inspired, how to jump in and do the writing anyway. Because believe me, you're often not going to feel very inspired as a copywriter, especially when you're writing about things like, oil and gas and, just boring stuff, financial stuff or whatever, stuff that's just not interesting to you necessarily. Yeah. So that's sort of the short version of how I came to writing as a career. And then, of course, writing novels was something I had sort of done most of my life, in one form or another. I had a lot of what I call my starts or my thirds. And by that, I mean, I'd write like a third of a book and then abandon it. And so, when I finally wrote my first actual novel, I sent it to an agent. I got ripped off by one agent that wasn't really an agent. And then I sent it to an agent, and I managed to get a contract, and I was going to go the whole traditional route. And basically, the contract wasn't very favorable to me. It put me, out of pocket for marketing expenses, travel, all sorts of things. So even though I got an advance, I ended up giving it back and sort of losing money on the deal because I already spent some of it, and that sort of put a bad taste in my mouth for publishing at the time. And so it wasn't really until 2008 suddenly this idea of self-publishing, it had always been there, but it was always something that was frowned upon. Like, everyone sort of, brushes it aside. Those who can do, kind of thing. And so I was very hesitant at first, but when I started looking into it, I thought, well, what the heck? I've got some work. I've got a book. I had decided to write a book based on the long version of this. I won't go into, but the short version is I had sort of partnered up with my brother-in-law and a good friend, and we were going to write a web series and for video. We were all TV and video professionals, and we were going to produce something. That never panned out, but what did come out of it is I wrote a book based on our treatment, and that was the first Citadel book. And then for some reason I wrote book 1 of 3 on the cover, which committed me to 2 more, and that's where it all started. So I posted that first one, and then it went on to I've got to write a second one, and I spent 2 years just dragging the second one out, and then got that out, and then I spent another 2 years, dreading writing the third book, and that sort of brings us to the point where I had to change, my approach.
Yeah.
So the business of being an author started with that third book, because that was the turning point for me.
Yeah.
That was probably a little bit more of an answer than you had expected.
No, that's great. I love that, your process and stuff, and just that you kept going, because sometimes we face as writers these setbacks, right? And it does sometimes leave a bad taste in our mouth, right? And just to sort of move through that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's the thing about this as a business, writing as a business and a career. Setbacks are part and parcel of the whole thing. I mean, you're no one who goes into writing as a career is going to get through unscathed. Yeah. I always think everything comes back to The Walking Dead for me for some reason. The character of Carl in Walking Dead. Yeah. In the graphic novel, there's a scene where he's talking to Rick and his father, and he's already. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but I mean, if you don't know this stuff by now, you're not a fan. So his eye was shot out, right, in both the graphic novel and the series. And there's a scene where he's talking to Rick, and he says, I know you thought I would get through this unscathed, but this stuff leaves its mark. And I'm paraphrasing, but that to me is the same. It applies to the career of writing. Yeah. You're never going to get through it unscathed. There's always going to be setbacks. There's always going to be that publisher that told you were no good. There's always going to be those bad reviews. There's going to be that email from the guy who tells you, your everything you do is crap. There's always going to be that. And so part of the sort of the process of becoming the author. So the chrysalis of authordom is all this negative stuff that's going to come your way, and that's going to form that chrysalis around you, and that will actually help you emerge someday as this beautiful butterfly of an author that you're going to be. That's really what it comes down to. So you're gonna take some hits.
Well, that's encouraging to not I think it's just part of the process, right? I mean, Stephen Pressfield talks about that in his what is it, The War of Art, his book. Yeah, The War of Art. Yeah. And just how resistance sort of slams you quite often.
Right.
And
Right. And if you don't learn how to roll with it,
Yeah.
and actually even use it. Everyone will tell you, you need to learn how to take constructive criticism, or you need to learn how to ignore negative criticism, and those two statements are true. I think though that it's not always about using criticism to perfect your work or something. Sometimes it's just about hearing someone else's interpretation of your reality and deciding for yourself that that's not your reality. If someone tells you, for instance, I mean, I did have someone tell me that I was better at writing about writing than actually writing, or better at talking about writing than actually writing. That's a hurtful thing for anybody to hear. And I've got a few awards that kind of prove that, inaccurate, but those things were, they don't always salve that wound. So you have to learn how to take that sort of thing take in someone else's viewpoint, consider it for its merits, and then, decide for yourself who you are. Yeah. Sort of the, I mean, I've started reading, I've read bits of this in the past, but I started reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which, it's amazing. It's amazing. And it's a short read. So if you haven't read it yet, please go read it. It does start off talking about the Holocaust, and, he was in a concentration camp, and horrible things, but, he doesn't go into a ton of detail about what happened there. But one of the concepts that comes out of that book is that, free will actually means that, the only thing we really have control of in our lives is how we will interpret things and how we will react to them. We may not be able to control our actual physical freedom, or whether or not readers pick up our book. These things may be completely out of our control, but we can decide how we react and how we can control who we are in that moment. We may not be able to control, our options, but we can control how we think about our lives and how we see ourselves. So, and the meaning of our lives. Yeah. That went a little deep. I'm sorry about that.
No, I appreciate that. Actually, that's really good. Yeah. So I think as writers anyway, this is why we're usually doing this, because we like going deeper,
right.
Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, really,
Right.
Yeah. We like going deeper. So that's great.
We are at heart explorers.
I think, right?
All writers are. All writers. I mean, even nonfiction writers, even journalists, copywriters in advertising and marketing. We are exploring the world around us, interpreting it and reinterpreting it, and then conveying that to someone else. We're this camera lens that spits out a somewhat skewed version of reality, because everyone interprets things in their own way, So in order to we convey not the accuracy of what we're seeing, but the emotion of it and the the feelings behind it. That's what we're actually out to do as writers, any type of writer.
Yeah, which is why books are so awesome, right?
Right.
I love getting deeper into the emotion of things, and that's why I love reading, right? With fiction or nonfiction too, like whichever, right? And that's great. Boy, you do know how to explain things really well. That's awesome.
I better. Literally every aspect of my life, not just my career, but my life is this idea of how do I communicate? At heart, if I didn't refer to myself as a writer, I would have to refer to myself as a communicator. Because everything about my life is that. I didn't start off very good at it. You practice and you become better at these things. Having the podcasts, my career before now, it was all about communication. So I learned a few things, but honestly, it's been within the past, I'd say 5 years, that I've really kind of kicked it up a notch and become, I think much better at it. And that's very good news for everybody, because believe me, if a clout like me can do it, you can do it. I mean, you can do some amazing things. I think there are people who are much better qualified to do what I do. So I want to encourage them to go out and, and do that and practice these things and learn and grow and become something truly amazing. I do want to see that.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, when I read your 30-day author book, you said you took a few years in between each book, right? In
Right.
the first series.
I wrote the first book, and I made the fateful decision to say book 1 of 3, which committed me, and that commitment gnawed at me for the next 6 years. It was as of the third book. Basically, I had gone through various transitions. I'd lost a couple of jobs in between writing the first and the third. Something always seemed to happen. I'd gotten married. I'd had a lot of lifestyle changes. I was feeling very out of control in my life around that time. And so this third book was sitting there just looming. And I was able to call myself an author because I had written and published. Those are the 2 requirements, right? But I could not look at myself in the mirror and refer to myself mentally as an author because I felt like that you get that fraud syndrome or, imposter syndrome. I was starting to feel like that. Actually, I've always felt like that since day one. But I was really feeling it because, how can I refer to myself as the author of the Citadel trilogy if there's no trilogy, Yeah. How can I consider myself an author if I'm not actively out there producing more books? And I think also this is where the distinction between author and writer comes in, because writers, or let me put it this way, authors have written and writers write. And it may be more fun to say it the other way. Writers write and authors have written. You can be an author and then never write another word. Mm-hmm. That's just the reality of that, right? A writer is continuously improving and continuously producing. A writer writes. And so that distinction set it off for me. At that point, I was a copywriter. I was an award-winning copywriter. I was doing very well. I'd had stuff, some scripts that I wrote were produced and helped produce. These spots were run in front of President Obama and his cabinet. I had reach. Yeah. But I still felt like a failure because I hadn't finished this third book. And so I sat down one day and I wrote in a journal. It's buried in a box somewhere here in the office, I'm sure. I wrote in a journal my goals, and one of the goals was, and this cracks me up to this day. One of the goals was, I will find 2 hours a week to write fiction. And I look back on that now. I'm like, wow, only 2 hours. I was like, that was my big goal. Is I just want to find 2 hours out of the week. And then I promptly never did it. And that's the point at which, a year or so later, I'm looking at that and I see that goal and I think, I didn't manage to find even 2 hours in a week to write. Surely I have time, I surely. And so I started kind of reaching out and investigating. I started listening to podcasts and reading books and reading articles. And I started studying people who were self-publishing like me at the time and trying to determine what's different between them and me. I started listening to things like the Self-Publishing Podcast, those 3 guys. Huge influence on what I did next. Then it came to Christmas 2013, I decided if I'm going to do this, I really got to commit to it. Mm-hmm. Nothing I could produce is going to just happen. Yeah. The only way to do this is to commit and develop a writing habit. At that point, I didn't think it was going to be a daily writing habit. But the more I listened to people and the more I read and the more I talked to people, the more I realized, it has to be a daily habit. Yeah. And why wouldn't I? I've been writing my whole life. I mean, there was no barrier between me and the page except my own free will. So at that point, I sat down and I thought through it all logically. And I created that formula, which is in the 30-Day Author, which I will gladly give everyone for free. You do not have to buy the book. I appreciate if you do. But ask me. And I can't remember it off the top of my head, so don't ask me right now. But I can give you the gist. So the idea was I sat down and figured out, okay, if an average book, let's just say that, at the time, what was it? So NaNoWriMo was really kind of just getting popular at that point. It had been popular for a while. I'd read No Plot, No Problem, Chris Beatty's book. And the concept of writing a book in 30 days just seemed bizarre at that time. I hadn't explored that idea yet. And then the concept of, a daily writing habit that was starting to these things were starting to meld together for me. So I thought, okay, how many days would it take me to write a 60,000 word book? I think 50,000 actually at the time. 50,000 was what their minimum, right? Yeah. So I'm like, okay, how can I do this? And I broke it all down, like how many words I'd have to write per day. And I'm like, well, what if I took 2 days off a week? Okay, well, you have to write this many words during the week. And so I figured all this out. I figured out the formula. Once I had the formula, it was all about commitment. Okay, I need to write 1,500 words a day in order to do this. Can I do that? Well, I write, 8, 10, 20,000 words a day in my work. I mean, I do. It's just what I do. And so I'll carve off 1,500 of those for this project. That means write for an hour, and knock it out. Well, I started doing that. And then eventually, 15 days later, I had a draft of this third book that I had literally put off for, probably at least 2 years. Yeah. And I thought, well, if that worked, let me try it again. And so I came up with a completely different concept. I wanted to try something completely new. I wrote a book, and I wrote it in 15 days. And I wrote the next one in 15 days. And the reason I call the book 30-Day Author, by the way, is because 15 days I write the first draft. Yeah. The next 15, it's editing and rewrites, and I don't do a ton of rewriting these days. I'll be honest with you. I do edit, but the actual going back, the old school idea of I'm going to rewrite everything, that doesn't really, to me, that doesn't work. Well, we can go into that if you want, but the process here is write freely, and then edit the crap out of it and make it good, and then publish it. And you can do that in 30 days. And if that's not comfortable to you, you can do it in 60 days or 90 days. It doesn't really matter. The point is you can determine, I'm not a math guy. Okay. I do have an engineering background, but not because I was good at math. But here's the idea. If you know any two variables, you can figure out a way to work toward your goal. So I knew that I wanted 50,000 words. I knew that I wanted to have that book finished in 30 days. So I knew based on that how many words I'd have to write per day. Okay. Yeah. And that's really where the daily writing habit stuff kicked in, because it just happened by default. If you're going to produce a volume of work in 30 days, and you've got to produce this many words per day to get there, you're going to learn to write every day by default. So it just becomes a natural habit. So I may have nuclear blasted the question at this point, but the idea there was I figured out that I could do it. Then I replicated the success to verify that I could do it, and just started doing it from then on. And it has evolved for me since then. And now I don't necessarily push myself to write a book in 30 days because I don't necessarily have to. I mean, it's not necessarily about the speed. It's about the consistency. Yeah. So what I took away from it was I can consistently produce work. That's the goal. Yeah. I know how to do it. I used, certain tools like Scrivener. It has been very helpful to me. I used Ulysses for a while. I still use both for different reasons now. Those things helped, but they aren't actually even necessary. If you've got Microsoft Word or you've got Apple's Notepad, you can still do this. There's nothing to prevent you from writing. There's so many tools. The tools don't make the difference. The difference is all in the commitment, and it's all coming back to it every single day.
Yeah. So. When you started doing that, Kevin, I'm just curious. So so then you started writing books in 15 days, which is amazing.
Right.
Did you, put on your calendar, this is my production plan for the year? What did you kind of do to, How did you do
I
that?
would. I honestly wish I were that organized. But what I did was I kept committing myself. So I would write, just like I did with Citadel. Like I started writing my Sawyer Jackson books, and I put some note. I have something I started doing fairly early on. I have a section in my books at the very back called "Stuff at the End of the Book." And it's kind of an afterword, like an author's note, you know. It really is just an author's note. But the idea for me was I have always liked when I was still buying DVDs, which I don't buy anymore. My favorite thing about DVDs was always the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
I have watched the behind the scenes for the Lord of the Rings trilogy more times than I've ever seen the films. Okay. Far more times. So, because it's like 30 hours of footage, and it was all about film and television, and it was fascinating. But so I wanted to provide something kind of like that for the books, and I knew there were afterwards and author notes and that sort of thing, but that felt boring. So I started doing my stuff at the end of the book. So in the first one for Sawyer Jackson, I had mentioned this is an ongoing series. This is going to be an ongoing series. Little did I know that I would actually change, the type of writing I was going to do. I started kind of getting into thrillers. I wrote what I call a supernatural thriller because it's hard to categorize. I wrote Evergreen. I was on a trip to Manhattan and decided while I'm here, I'm going to write a book. I wrote a book. It was great. I did not make it a series. I may come back and write a sequel someday, but I purposefully did not make it a series because I was already writing 2 series. Yeah. So I had this. I forget where I was going with that, but my whole concept was I announced in this afterward that I was going to make this an ongoing series, and so that committed me again, and I wrote another book, and I recently released the 3rd book in that series, and I decided, okay, this is it. I'm going to make this a trilogy because it's outside the scope of what I want to do now. But those were heavy motivators. That stuff will push you to go and to it commits you. The commitment again. I rambled on too much, and now I've completely forgotten the question you asked me.
Well, no,
I do that.
No, that's okay. I was just kind of curious if you had sort of a production schedule and stuff. But I mean, if you're constantly writing, then I guess that makes.
I more or less, yeah. So I don't go through the trouble of creating a production schedule, though I probably should. But I do know the books that I want to write for over the next year. I have in my head a list. Well, actually, what I've started doing, I use Day One as a journaling app. Yes. You can create various journals. I journal, and I think everyone should. But I have a separate journal that is nothing but book concepts. Really? I don't go very elaborate with this either, by the way. Sometimes the entire entry is nothing but a title for the book, and that's it. The book I'm working on right now, The Devil's Interval, is another Dan Kotler thriller. That's an ongoing series for me. It's a different kind of series. It's more like the Jack Reacher books, It's, so you can read them practically in any order, and you don't have to read any of the other books to pick up one and enjoy it. That was the goal, to finally have a series like that. But I will keep story ideas, usually in the form of a title, in this journal. So when I'm ready to jump on to the next book, I know which one I want to do. I recently participated in the James Patterson Masterclass competition thing, Write with James Patterson, co-author with James Patterson. Yeah. Did not get picked. Bummer. But what I did get out of it was I pitched an idea for a book, and I loved the idea. And so I decided from day one, if I don't get picked for this, I'm going to write this book. It's actually easier for me to write it than to co-author it, because James Patterson is an outliner just all day long, and I am not. do not outline. So I was not looking forward to that part, but I was willing to do it because because how often does that opportunity come around? But so the much shorter answer to this question is I do not have a calendar of books that I'm going to write, but I do know what's coming up. Yeah. And I'm developing a strategy now because I do enjoy writing these Dan Kotler thrillers. Dan Kotler is my protagonist. So I do enjoy these books, but I also know me, and I know that I can get burned out. And so what I've been doing is I'll write a Dan Kotler book, and then I'll write something completely different. I have embraced the fact that I am a cross-genre author. And so I will write thriller and then some completely weird genre if I want, and come back to my thrillers. And so in that way, I can make a steady production throughout the year, and I'm writing things that interest me, and I can explore ideas in any direction I want. But I've still got my mainstay. I've still got the root of my empire, as it were.
Yeah. That's great, and that's actually really good to hear. Because sometimes I've thought about that, and I've thought, oh, do I have to stay in like one or two genres, or can I? Because sometimes you have ideas. For example, I have a dystopian that's like 6 chapters long on the computer. I want to get back to it because I love dystopian. But
yeah, I do too, actually.
Yeah.
Well, my advice for that. Okay, so here's the thing. Everything about this business is strategy, and if you're not thinking strategically, it becomes much more difficult. But the strategy I would use if you are interested in being cross-genre. Well, first of all, the realities of the business are if you are focused on one specific type of story and really straight down to one specific series, if you write nothing but that series, your success can come much faster. Yeah. It's fact. I can prove it. I can show you numerous examples. I can prove it. So if your goal is between now and 5 years from now, I want to be a successful author writing, with this many people following me or whatever, you're going to get to your goal much faster and much easier if you stick to one genre, one series, one character, and write 20 or 30 books in that series. Reference Lee Child if you want some proof, because that dude only writes Jack Reacher books. That's it. One of the most famous authors on the planet, one of the most prolific, not most prolific, but he's very good at what he does. He's very well known. He's beloved. He only writes one character. Yeah. On the other hand, there are authors that I love. Orson Scott Card is a great example. He wrote Ender's Game, and that's what he's most known for. He's a cross-genre author. He's written sci-fi, he's written fantasy, he's written historic romance, he's written religious themed books. I mean, he's got a whole catalog of books, and the only thing that connects them all is him. So now he was successful because he had a big hit on his hands right off the bat. Yeah. Okay, but if you start looking at other authors, the ones who write cross genre, if they are successful, it will. I'm going to just make up a number and say 80% of the time it took them longer to become successful than their compatriot who's only doing one book, one series, or one genre. And maybe it's higher than 80%. So just be aware. So the strategy would be, if you want to be a cross-genre author, is you want to segment your audience, and you're going to have to split personality this thing. I mean, you're going to have to, I don't necessarily recommend writing under pen names unless you're trying to protect your identity. Yeah. So if you're, primarily a sci-fi writer and you want to write erotica and you don't want the two to meet, then use a pen name. But if you're cool with your name being on everything, and I am, I don't write erotica and won't, but and nothing wrong with it. I don't want the letters. But if you're writing cross genre, what you want to do is set a tone for each type of book, and then be consistent within that category. So what I mean by that is, all right, I write thrillers. Right now, all my thrillers are in the same series. They all look alike. So in that sense, I'm doing the focus thing. Okay. all my science fiction books all look alike. All my fantasy books all look alike. They look different from each other, but they look alike. I do little things to bring them together so that you know if you're a Kevin Tumlinson fan, then you can recognize Kevin Tumlinson. If you are a Kevin Tumlinson sci-fi fan, you can jump right into that category and you don't even have to worry about the other books. So there are little things you can do there. Keep the tone, straight for each type of book. If you build mailing lists, which I do recommend, pardon me, had to clear my throat there. Sorry. If you build mailing lists, segment your mailing list for each genre or category you write in. Okay. So in other words, you can have one massive list, but don't ever send that whole massive list your emails about your fantasy book. I'm saying this knowing full well I have broken this rule and still continue to break this rule. But the best advice is segment your mailing list so that you can send a fantasy newsletter, you can send a sci-fi newsletter, you can send a thriller newsletter. All these things go to the right people that came in for the right reasons. And you do that. There's various ways to do that. We don't have the scope to talk about all the finer details of that, but I am happy to answer questions if people want to reach out to me. So I can tell you some ways to do this.
That's the thing when you have all these ideas, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you want to do is you never want to disrupt or damage the expectations of your readers. You want to give them what they love about you. You can hit them up with, hey, I know you came in on my sci-fi list, but I also write this fantasy series, and if you're interested, go sign up here and get a free copy of the first book, and you can read it and enjoy it. Leave a review, and if they are interested, they'll do that. So there's a cross-pollination that can happen, but you should treat everything. I think in terms of in my Sawyer Jackson books. Are sort of a foundation for all this. But I mean, I always think in terms of parallel realities. My sci-fi is one reality, and Sawyer Jackson and the fantasy books, they're another reality, and Dan Kotler's another reality, and I can cross those over anytime I want because, I'm the omnipotent force in all these universes, right? And so I can cross those over anytime I feel like it. And I do. Every single book I write is connected in some small way. There's Easter eggs in every book that connect them in the same omniverse, as I call it. Oh, that's great. It's fun. And it's really fun when people read all my books because they'll spot things. But the point there was you should treat each individually. And don't mash them all together into one thing all the time because your sci-fi readers are probably, more realistically, your sci-fi readers and your thriller readers are probably going to be essentially the same audience. But your thriller readers probably aren't going to care at all about your YA fantasy books or, something along those lines. Or they, and if you do write erotica, I can promise you that the people who come in on YA fantasy are not interested in your erotica. So. And it might go the other way, but it definitely ain't going to go that way. Yeah. So, or if they are interested, they may actually be interested. Let me rephrase this: they may actually be interested, but you should not want them to be interested. So, anyway,
kind of winding down. You also kind of help authors sort of understand and get started using draft to digital. So. Right. Would you share exactly what Draft to Digital is and then how it can help authors?
Okay, so Draft to Digital, I am the director of marketing for Draft to Digital. I represent them out in the world. And what they are is they're a publishing aggregate. So if you want your books to appear in multiple places, Kobo, Apple iBooks, Barnes & Noble, etc., you can come to Draft to Digital, upload your manuscript, and we really have one of the easiest, cleanest conversion processes I've ever encountered. This is why I was brought on, because I talk about them. I was talking about them well before I ever worked for them. I was representing them for free for years, and so what they've got is this really amazing conversion process. It's all free. Everything about Drafted Digital is free, all the way to the point where you hit publish. Once you hit publish, it goes out to all of the different ebook retailers, the biggies, and we're very picky. Like, one of the things people will comment about is that we have fewer vendors than, say, Smashwords or one of our competitors. Which is true, because we're very picky about who we'll do business with, because we want to make sure the authors get paid. We want to make sure there's promotion opportunities. There's all these things that we do behind the scenes. But what happens is we only make money when you make a sale. So we get a cut of the royalties. Like I think it comes out total to like 15%. Okay. So really it's 10%, but I think it comes out to 15 by the time you factor in the cut that the retailer takes and that sort of thing. So we want to be honest and fair. So you'll get, your like 85% of whatever comes. It comes down to like getting 60% is what it comes out to. If you start doing math. I know that all sounded very confusing. Let me just put it this way. You essentially get a 60% royalty from every book sold. The only way we make money is when you sell. So it's in our best interest to help you sell as much as we can. We don't go out and market for you. We don't do any of that. We do have some tools you can use to market yourself, which are awesome. The key takeaway should be, though, everything Drafted Digital does is free for indie authors. It's always free. We don't take money directly from the indie author. We only take a cut of royalty. And where this is an advantage is you don't actually have to use us to distribute the book. You could actually come in, convert the book for free, take it to Kobo and Apple iBooks and Barnes & Noble and all the others. You could do all that on your own, and you get a really cool, really clean ebook that works on all the devices. We test them. We have automated front matter, which allows you to, all the table of contents about the author, the, books also by page, the books that are also by this author, a teaser for your next book, all that stuff we can insert for you automatically and for free. And you get a Mobi file, which is used on Kindle, and you get an EPUB file, which is used everywhere else. All that stuff is free. And we have tools like universal book links, which help you to promote your work. And, we're constantly upgrading and constantly developing new services. So the whole point there is we do it for the author. We're founded by authors. I'm an author. A big chunk of us are either authors or we've worked in publishing for a while. And we want the author to have tools for success, which is the whole point. So you can use all those things and go off and use it anywhere you like. Give your book away for free as an ARC, advanced reader copy, or upload it to InstaFreebie. Shout out to InstaFreebie, great source for building a mailing list and getting your book out there and for people to sample. Drafted Digital empowers you to do all that. That's the whole point of Drafted Digital. We are a publishing aggregate, and that means that we will take your manuscript, put it out to all the different retailers, and then the big advantage of using us is that we give you this very cool, very simple, very clean, beautifully designed dashboard that shows you all of your sales on every channel, all the royalties that are due to you. We pay monthly, so we can only pay if we get money from the vendor, but once we have money, the next pay period, that money's yours. And we when we get promotions, like we've got a big promotion with Kobo coming up, and we're going to bring in around 20,000 of our authors' books into this promotion. We do that stuff. We're out there doing that stuff. So those are the advantages of publishing through us. And then, but it's always up to the author. We always want it to be up to the author. So that was a long-winded answer. Drafted Digital is a very nuanced business.
That sounds very simple to use and very helpful to get for authors' books to go into all these different platforms. So yeah, it's definitely, honestly, the reason I discovered them in the first place was because I was so sick and tired of constantly having every book vendor I went to. They have different rules, different requirements for the cover, different requirements for the interior content,
And the thing about Draft to Digital, we're not unique in being an aggregate.
Yeah.
We are unique in that if you have a problem and you contact our customer support folks, you get an actual live, breathing human being who will solve your problem. And if they can't solve your problem, we'll find a way. But I mean, we'll tell you, this problem is unsolvable. Sometimes it happens, but 99% of the time we can help you. So that's the whole beauty of Draft to Digital, is that everyone makes the claim they're customer oriented. We are very indie author oriented. It is the heart and soul of everything that we do. I can promise you, I make this statement from time to time. I do not need to work for Draft to Digital to make a living. I don't have to. I have a career spanning back to 5 years old that would support me and my wife just fine. The reason I work for them is because I love everything they do. I would not work for them if they were not as indie-centric as they are. So if you value my testimony at all,
yes, no, that's awesome.
Go and sign up. So.
Yeah, because I think there's people listening that are kind of new to being an indie author, to self-publishing, and just aren't sure about the different things out there, right, that can help them and the different platforms.
Well, and to those people, I mean, if you're brand new to it, I first of all, I want to tell you how just amazing it is. If you've got a book, one book, it's just amazing. Like, it's just this amazing accomplishment, and you do deserve like full-on kudos for the hard work you put in. I understand where that came from. We will reach out to me. I mean, Draft to Digital can definitely help you publish. There are advantages, by the way, because there are programs like KDP Select through Amazon that require you to be exclusive to them. There are some advantages to that, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody about why you might choose to do that, at least to start. But we can actually help you get into markets globally. Doesn't cost you a dime. You got nothing to do but make money with it. And we can help you there. And I am always happy. One of my sort of charter missions in life is to help authors, indie authors in particular, build their author careers and build towards success. I love doing it. It's a passion project for me, and I'll do it free of charge. Just call me up, email me anytime, and I'll give you any advice I can. So. Sorry, you hit a button right at the end. Like, I get really passionate and excited about.
No, that's great. I love that, Kevin. That's awesome. So that's really helpful. That'll be helpful for first time authors that are kind of listening, that are kind of in the self-publishing indie author route there. So,
yeah.
I like to end interviews by asking authors, what is one piece of writing advice that has helped you the most, or maybe advice that you wish you would have been given when you started? Can you think of something?
Buy Apple stock. No, I honestly, it always comes back for me to the daily writing discipline. Right, get that daily writing habit. I know that's somewhat self-serving in that I wrote an entire book about this. It's a short read, by the way. You can read it in an hour because it was meant to be that kind of book. But what I wish I could convey to my younger self is that idea of, first of all, that whole concept of I'll find 2 hours a week still haunts me to this day, because it speaks to something about who I was at the time, that I didn't believe I could find the time to write a book, that writing a book is a monumental task that's difficult to do. And I wish I could tell that person, just every morning you get up, and instead of watching TV for an hour before you go to work, or instead of anything else you might do, spend that hour and just put as little as 200 words on a page. I mean, that's like a sentence or two. Just put some words on the page every single day, and then track that. How many words did I do today? How long did it take me to get that? How far along am I on this book? Don't worry about editing as you go. That's a dumb idea. I can tell you why. Reach out to me. But just write every single day. Put something on the page every single day. And the funny thing about any journey whether it's writing a book, whether it's, you're going to walk from here to Timbuktu. The thing about it is it's all incremental progress, And the great thing is people panic over this idea of, I got to write 100,000 words for this book. That's insane. Okay, you don't. You only have to write 500 words. And then tomorrow write 500 more. And the great thing is all the days that you spent writing before still exist. All those words still exist. And when you come to the end, you write the end. I never write the end. But I mean, you finish the book. And now it's just read it and fix the stuff that's wrong. And that's it. I mean, so my advice would be get into the daily habit of sitting down and writing. Don't worry about how many words you write. Don't worry about how many hours you have to spend. If you have 30 minutes and you can only write 10 words, do it. But do it every single day, and you will get to a book. And that's the very best advice I could ever offer anybody.
Oh, that's great. I love your passion too, Kevin. That's awesome. No wonder you're such a communicator.
This is definitely something I'm passionate about, for sure.
I love that. Well, and I would encourage everybody to get your book, 30-Day Author. It really helped me because that's been a struggle of mine. Getting books finished. So anyway.
You do gotta finish, yeah.
So anyway, I'm reading it over again. I always have to read books twice.
No, I do too. I do too. That's the sign of an author. And authors read once for experience and twice for knowledge.
Yeah, that's me. That's definitely me. So, would you just share some new books or projects that you have on the go right now? And then where can writers and readers find you online?
Well, first you can find me online. KevinTumlinson.com is my personal address. Draft to Digital, draft2digital.com is where you'll find Draft to Digital. And you can reach out to me on either of those. I do not own Draft to Digital. Sometimes people misconstrue this, but you can reach me there by contacting customer support if you want to ask me something. But the work on May 5th, I don't know when this airs, but on May 5th right now it's in pre-order. I have the third and final Sawyer Jackson book. That's part of my YA fantasy series that releases. It's been very popular. And I am currently working on a third Dan Kotler thriller, which is called The Devil's Interval. And I'm about a quarter of the way through that. So in a month or so, I'll have that ready to go. And beyond that, I continuously, I'm always working on something. You can read blog posts and that sort of thing. Check out the Wordslinger podcast. You can find that on my website as well. That's it. I've got so many books. I could go on and on about the books that are ahead, but I won't do that to you.
Well, that's awesome. Well, and thanks so much, Kevin, just for taking the time to be on the podcast today. Just really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I love talking to people about this stuff, as you can tell. So yes, thank you for having me on.